Hello and welcome to Stock Issues of Policy Advocacy, Part 6, Organization. This is the sixth in the six-part series of stock issues. So you've already understood what they are. We looked at each of the four stock issues in depth. Purpose of this sixth and final presentation is to help you understand how all of these come together to form the organization of your speech. You'll notice on the slide the picture of the framed house from the Canon of Rhetoric of Organization. That again, we're looking at how we organize and arrange the stock issues in such a way to give structure to the speech and increase the persuasive impact of your policy advocacy speech. All right, some general principles of organization that are worth reviewing. First, your public policy speech will be very similar to the informative speech in terms of what I'm looking for in terms of introduction, conclusion, and transitions. So we've looked at that already. Read and reread Chapter 6 if you have any questions about those things. And again, recognize that my take on introductions and conclusions are a little bit different from your textbook. One of the key things that I do want you to include in your introduction is your thesis statement. We talked about thesis statements when we talked about cure. Occasionally there's a good reason for a delayed thesis statement. For the purposes of this speech, I want the thesis statement in the introduction. So you're going to get our attention, then you're going to state your thesis, some decision-making body, should, some legislative verb, some specific policy. Make sure that's in your introduction. Then also you'll preview your main points. We'll talk about how we're going to organize those in a bit. You'll also have a conclusion that concludes them or that reviews the main points, leaves us with the final thought, certainly transitions throughout. Middle bullet point here is the idea that no matter what we're going to be looking at, we're looking at a modified problem solution approach. So again, if you read Chapter 6, one of the suggested organization patterns is what they call the problem-solution approach. And problem-solution approaches are, first of all, you're going to see them more in persuasive speeches than in informative speeches, so that's why we're going to see it. And you certainly see them in public policy speeches. And what we're going to do is look at ways that we can implement the stock issues and arrange them into a modified problem solution approach. I'll be showing you some outlines, and again, these outlines are ways that you will structure the body of your speech. For the purpose of the formal sentence outline for this speech, it will have all of the other parts, right? Introduction, transitions, conclusions, all of those things, but the only part with the Roman numerals and the numbers and the letters and all that is going to be the body of the speech. One of the things that's going to happen here, particularly as you watch your classmates' speeches, is that we are going to have a number of similar underlying structures. That again, if you know the pattern, you can build anything off of it. And again, I've probably seen this slide before of what the bird looks like with just the skeleton, what the bird looks like with just the muscles, what the bird looks like with the skin and feathers and everything else on it. Notice that that same bird skeleton could work for a variety, potentially, of different birds that all look different on the outside. In the same way, we're going to have a lot of speeches that are going to look different on the outside, but are all going to share a basic skeletal structure, which are different takes on this modified problem solution approach. All right. I've got three proposed outlines for you, and that doesn't mean that you are limited to just these three. Any of these three could work. Certainly you could kind of devise sort of your own as a morph between the three, but let's look at the first one. Rather than three main points, we're looking at four main points, and we have one main point for each of the four stock issues. So the preview is going to be, first I'll talk about the ills, then we'll talk about some of the blame, next I'll introduce a cure, and then we'll discuss the costs and benefits associated with this policy. And I will give each of the stock issues its own main point in the speech. This is a great way of making sure that all of the stock issues are accounted for. Again, it has 4 points instead of 3, but you can get away with that. 4 isn't too many. And so I would highly recommend the stock issue approach. Reasons why this might not work as well is you want the stock issues to be fairly equally, or you want the main points of your speech to be fairly equal in size. And depending on how much evidence you have and where you're making a big deal out of this, you might not necessarily find this to be a very balanced approach to your speech. So let's look at another one. Another way that we can do it is a more conventional problem solution approach. In this case, notice that my outline only has 2 main points. Again, we kind of like this idea of 3 main points. 2 is still close enough. That I'm going to talk about a problem, then I'm going to introduce a solution. Notice that we then break down the problem and solution into ABC. And you might need to do a little bit of an internal preview. So the preview in your introduction is, let's talk about the problem and then the solution. Once you get to the problem, you might then need to say, in discussing the problem, we'll need to talk about these 3 elements, which are your ABC. Maybe I've got significant ills. Maybe I've got widespread ills. Remember how we talked about that ills have those 2 different dimensions. Maybe I've got an A where I'm telling the story, and I should have made that intense. I'm noticing my error right now. All problems are significant, or you want them to be significant, but maybe A is the intense ills, and you tell a story. B is the widespread ills, and you introduce the statistics. C is the blame, where we talk about what are the barriers that might exist. You then transition into your main point number 2, the solution. And again, an internal preview of, let me tell you how this solution solves the problem, let me tell you about some costs, but let me tell you how overall the benefits are going to outweigh the costs. So notice that my solution includes the cost benefits, or the solution includes the stock issues of cure, and then cost and benefit, cost being the B, benefits being the C. Maybe this is a way that's going to work for you. Notice that whether I looked at the stock issue approach or the problem solution approach, the same issues are there. It's just a matter of how I categorize them. One other way that I might categorize them is what I call the problem solution and then CBA approach. CBA is secret code for cost benefit analysis. So again, maybe my 1 is the problem and my A is a review of the ills. Maybe if I talked about my ills in my informative speech, I don't need to make as big a deal of it in my public policy speech. I still need to mention it, but maybe it's a review and only 1 subpoint. Notice that this is now 1/6 of my speech. I'm only going to give, 45 seconds on reviewing the ills. My 1B becomes the blame. Again, that important stock issue of why do these ills persist? Main point 2 is my solution. Maybe I need to make a big deal of explaining exactly what this cure and what this policy is going to be. Maybe part of A on the cure is I need to let my audience know what the new policy would be, right? So if I'm advocating a repeal of the Electoral College, what am I going to replace it with? Or if I'm advocating for maybe I just need to talk about the policy for a bit. The B, maybe I need some additional solvency evidence. How am I going to prove to my audience that my solution will in fact solve the problem? I then move into Roman numeral 3, where now I get serious about weighing the costs and benefits. So again, notice that I still have ill, blame, cure, cost, benefit in that order, but again, where I break them down is a little bit differently. So these 3 proposed organizational formats are going to give you 3 different skeletons that you might want to choose from. And again, notice that maybe you do a weird morph between problem solution and cost benefit analysis. Whatever is going to make sense to you, but the key thing is to have all of the stock issues present, clear divisions, clear relationships between your supporting points at the AB level and your main points at the Roman numeral 1, 2, 3 level. Once you get down, again, maybe it happens at the AB level, maybe it happens at the 1, 2, 3 level, which is why I've numbered these 1, 2, 3. You're going to get into that evidence sandwich. And I think I showed you the quotation sandwich earlier in class. I'm going to expand this a little bit to include the evidence sandwich, where step number 1, you set up the evidence and cite your source. You're going to introduce some evidence to us. Where does it come from? And that gives you the chance to kind of build the credibility of the source of your information. Number 2, you state the evidence. Maybe you're telling a story or giving an example. Maybe you're reading a quotation. Maybe you're paraphrasing a quotation. Maybe you're sharing a statistic, right? All of these types of supporting material, these inartistic proofs that we've talked about. And the number 3 is to impact the evidence. And I'm just noticing now I didn't close the quote there. Sorry for all of you with OCD that are bothered by that. So we impact the evidence, and then what that means is that you tell us what the evidence means, and you answer the so what question that we're likely to have with any sort of evidence. So this evidence sandwich of setting it up, stating it, and impacting the evidence, notice that I can do this to illustrate that the problem exists. And maybe I need to show that it's an intense problem and my evidence is a story. Maybe a little bit later in my speech I want to show that it's a widespread problem and the evidence is my statistics. I'm going to show how this is going to solve the problem, that I've got some solvency evidence, and I'm going to use some parallel reasoning. So my evidence is the effectiveness of the policy in Colorado, and if it worked in Colorado, it ought to work in Utah, because Utah and Colorado are similar in the ways that matter for this policy, right? And setting up that comparison might be part of setting up the evidence, impacting the evidence. The number 3 might be part of showing, how Colorado and Utah are consistent in those sorts of ways. So look for ways to put in this evidence sandwich at the 1, 2, 3 level of your speech as you flesh out those skeletons we already looked at. No matter what you do, sequencing is insanely important when it comes to making a persuasive appeal. You're going to have the problem and then the solution. Don't introduce the solution and then tell us the problem. Problem, then solution. And again, a slight difference on this is the fact that your solution will be a part of your thesis statement and stated in the introduction, but that's okay. I want that, at least that line of your solution in the introduction, knowing that you're then going to develop the problem in full, then develop the solution in full. We're also, when we talk about cost benefits as the two sides, we always want the cost to come first and then the benefits. If you go benefit then cost, the last thing your audience is going to remember is the cost, and they're going to be less likely to be persuaded that this is a good idea. If you do the costs first, it allows you to show how the benefits outweigh the costs. Finally, if you find the need to do this in your speech, you state the opposition, then your rebuttal. Now, some of you might not like this policy because, or opponents to my policy would disagree because. State the opposition position, and then you state your rebuttal. So you clarify and legitimize, important arguments that the opposition is making, and then you can provide your rebuttal at the end. So that's the organization, the last in this 6-part series of presentations. Hopefully you have a better understanding of what stock issues are, what is involved in each of the 4 various stock issues, and how you can use these stock issues to effectively organize your speech.